if I asked you to measure the temperature of a room, you would just grab a thermometer, right?
Right. I mean, it's simple. It's totally objective and unquestionable.
Exactly. But if I asked you to measure the intelligence of that exact same room, like, what tool do you reach for?
Yeah, that gets messy fast.
Yeah.
I mean, who even decides what intelligence looks like in the first place?
Right. Is it, a math test? Is it a measure of emotional empathy? Spatial awareness?
Exactly.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the invisible rules that govern what we actually call truth. Because, we throw the word research around constantly, right? You hear it every single day.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone says they're doing research.
Yeah, like people say they're doing research on which electric vehicle to buy, or researching the best neighborhood to move to, or doing their research before arguing with someone in a comments section.
Right, the classic internet reason.
Yeah. But let's be honest, usually what we're really doing is just we're scrolling through search results until we find like a few articles or reviews that confirm the decision we already secretly wanted to make anyway.
Yeah, we are basically just filtering for validation.
Totally.
That everyday definition of research, I mean, it's highly practical and it's immediate, but it's heavily, heavily driven by confirmation bias.
Right.
We just want a fast answer that aligns with our pre-existing worldview. But formal academic research, it operates in an entirely different dimension.
Which is what we're talking about today.
Exactly. It's actively designed to frustrate that human desire for a quick, comforting answer.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We are giving you a backstage pass to the scientific and academic world, basically handing you the ultimate toolkit for understanding how real, rigorous, tested knowledge is actually created.
It's so important.
It is. So when you see a headline claiming, new study proves X, we want you to know exactly how those researchers decided what was true and the mechanisms they actually used to prove it.
Right, looking under the hood.
Exactly. But to do that, we have to start by dismantling what most of us rely on every single day, which is just, common sense.
Oh, common sense.
Right. Common sense is comfortable. It's this assumption that if a conclusion aligns with natural judgment or like the majority opinion, then it just must be factual.
Yeah, but the scientific method was explicitly developed because common sense is just so frequently wrong.
Wait, really? Like that was the explicit reason?
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it. For centuries, common sense dictated that the sun revolved around the Earth.
Oh, true.
Because it looked like it did. Everyone agreed it did. It was common sense.
Right. You wake up, you see it move across the sky.
Exactly. But formal research, by contrast, it's systematic, it's analytical, and it's heavily, heavily methodical. I mean, it's a grueling, structured process designed to strip away those cognitive biases.
So you can't just go with your gut.
No, you absolutely cannot rely on what feels right. You have to rely on what can be systematically observed, experimented on, and proven under really strict parameters.
Right.
It requires defining exactly what needs to be achieved, collecting information systematically, and then analyzing it without any mercy for your own assumptions.
Wow, without mercy for your own assumptions.
I like that. But, before a researcher can even think about putting on a lab coat or sending out a survey, they have to do something that honestly sounds more like a late-night dorm room conversation than, like, hard science.
Yeah, they have to get philosophical.
Right. They have to decide what reality actually is, which blew my mind a little bit when I was reading the sources.
It's a huge step.
Yeah.
Because you cannot measure a phenomenon without first deciding if that phenomenon exists objectively in the physical world or if it, only exists subjectively in the minds of the people experiencing it.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Yeah.
Because a researcher's philosophical worldview dictates every single tool they eventually pick up, right?
Right. We call this philosophy an ontology.
Ontology, okay.
Yeah. It's the study of being, or basically how we view reality. And the most dominant, I guess you'd call it traditional worldview in science, is positivism. Positivism. Okay, so if I'm a positivist, what am I doing?
If you are a positivist, your ontology is realism. You operate on the core belief that there is a single objective truth out there in the universe, and it is completely independent of the observer.
Okay.
The universe operates by strict laws, and our job as researchers is just to discover them.
So the classic example here is the tree falling in the woods.
Yes, exactly.
To a positivist, it absolutely makes a sound. Like, it generates acoustic waves measuring a very specific decibel level, regardless of whether a human ear is actually there to process it.
Right. Reality does not require our participation.
It just is.
Exactly. It just requires precise measurement. Positivism relies heavily on this concept called empiricism,
Empiricism, which means...
which means valid knowledge can only be derived from direct, objective observation. So if you cannot measure it, if you can't quantify it in numbers, it falls outside the realm of rigorous scientific inquiry.
Oh, wow. So if I can't put a number on it, the positivist is just like, I'm out.
Pretty much. And this requires a really strict separation between the investigator and the investigated object. A positivist researcher views themselves as like a neutral instrument.
Oh, okay.
They do not influence the rock they are weighing. They merely record its mass.
Right. And I understand that entirely for like physics or chemistry.
Sure.
If I am measuring the boiling point of water at different altitudes, positivism is the only logical approach. But I mean, I struggle to see how this maps onto human behavior.
That's the big debate.
Because human beings are not rocks or water molecules. We are messy, we're emotional, we're totally unpredictable. Like, can you put a ruler to human grief?
You really can't.
Right. Can you isolate human social dynamics in a petri dish and actually expect the subjects to act as if they aren't being watched?
No, and that exact limitation is what birthed interpretivism, which is also often called constructivism.
Interpretivism. Okay, so what's their take?
Well, interpretivists look at the positivist approach to the social sciences, and they basically argue that trying to find universal laws of human behavior is fundamentally flawed.
Why?
Because humans assign meaning to their actions. I mean, a rock does not choose to fall.
Right.
But a human chooses to act based on this massive invisible web of cultural, historical, and personal context.
So it's all subjective.
Exactly. Therefore, interpretivism assumes there are no absolute objective social facts. Reality is socially constructed by the people living it.
Which completely changes the entire goal of the research.
Completely. You are no longer looking for, like, a universal law of physics. You are looking for a highly specific interpretation of an event.
But how does an interpretivist actually capture that? Because you can't just stand in the corner with a clipboard and observe. I mean, you have to get inside their heads.
Right. The technical term for this is seeking an emic perspective.
EMIC. E-M-I-C.
Yep. Emic. It means understanding a phenomenon strictly from the insider's point of view. Interpretivists strive for this thing called Verstehen.
Verstehen. Sounds German.
It is. It's a German concept introduced by sociologists like Max Weber, and it translates roughly to a deep, empathetic understanding.
Empathetic understanding.
Right. And it's revolutionary because it acknowledges that observing a social group from the outside actually corrupts your understanding of it.
Wait, observing them corrupts the understanding. How?
Well, imagine you observe a religious ritual from a strictly objective positivist stance.
Okay, I've got my clipboard.
Right. You might just record people kneeling and standing up at specific intervals. Subject knelt for 30 seconds, stood up for 10.
Yeah, that's what's objectively happening.
But you miss the entire reality of the event, because the reality exists in the spiritual meaning the participants attach to those movements.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so the context is the data.
Exactly. You have to understand the symbols and the cultural narratives.
That makes so much sense. Because, for example, if a researcher is studying the lived experiences of homeless youth, or examining how media discourse constructs the idea of beauty, a standardized multiple choice test is totally useless.
It tells you nothing.
Right. The knowledge doesn't exist independently out in the world. It's produced through the actual interaction between the investigator and the respondents.
Yes. The researcher is not a neutral instrument in interpretivism. They are a co-creator of the knowledge.
A co-creator.
Yeah, the conversation itself generates the data. But as you can imagine, this creates a profound philosophical divide.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, you have positivists on one side demanding objective, quantifiable facts, and interpretivists on the other arguing that all social reality is subjective and constructed.
It seems like a total stalemate, like they're not even speaking the same language.
They really aren't.
But researchers still have jobs to do, right? They have policies to write and incredibly complex social problems to solve.
Right. The world doesn't stop for a philosophy debate.
So this brings us to the middle ground, which the sources call post-positivism and pragmatism.
Yes.
So for my reading, post-positivism is essentially just positivism, but with a dose of humility.
That is a great way to put it.
Like, they still want to apply the scientific method to human behavior, but they admit that the ruler might be a little bendy.
Yeah, exactly. They recognize that complete objectivity is just impossible when studying complex social phenomena.
Because we're messy humans.
Right. Our measurements will always be slightly flawed, and our theories can never be absolute certainties. So instead of definitive laws, Post-positivists speak in probabilities.
Okay, probability.
Yeah. They will confidently state what is highly likely to happen, acknowledging the inherent noise in human data.
Got it. And then we have pragmatism, which I kind of love because pragmatism just bypasses the philosophical debate entirely, doesn't it?
It really does. A pragmatist looks at the war between objective reality and socially constructed reality and says, I don't care. What is the actual problem we are trying to solve?
I don't care. I love that.
Yeah, pragmatism focuses exclusively on the practical consequences and the utility of knowledge. It is completely a problem-solving orientation.
So they just do whatever works.
Exactly. If a highly structured, objective survey is the best way to understand a widespread economic issue, they use the survey.
Right.
But if a deep, empathetic interview is needed to understand, say, why people are rejecting a new public health initiative, they use the interview. They fully embrace methodological pluralism.
Methodological pluralism, meaning they use multiple methods.
Right.
But the mechanism they use for this is really fascinating because positivists usually rely on deduction, right? Like they start with a grand theory and test it with data.
Yes, top down.
Right. And interpretivists rely on induction. They gather a bunch of specific data on the ground and build a theory from the ground up.
Yes, bottom up.
But pragmatists use what the sources call an abductive leap, which sounds like a sci-fi concept, but what does that actually mean?
Abduction is fluid. Think of it like a doctor diagnosing a patient.
Okay.
The doctor observes a set of symptoms,
Right.
a fever, a cough. That is induction. They're making a tentative theory based on what they're observing in the room.
Right, gathering data on the ground.
Exactly. So they hypothesize it might be a specific infection. But then they order a targeted blood test to prove or disprove that specific theory.
Oh, and that's deduction.
That's deduction. So pragmatists bounce back and forth between observing and testing, allowing the demands of the problem to dictate the logic they use.
That makes total sense. They aren't tied down. Okay, so we've established the philosophical bedrock. We know how researchers view reality.
Yep.
But philosophy is totally useless if you don't actually have the tools to measure it in the real world.
Right. You have to actually do the work.
So how does a positivist actually translate this belief in an objective reality into physical action on, like, a Tuesday morning?
That brings us to how researchers choose their methodology.
Right. Positivism births quantitative research. Interpretivism births qualitative research. And pragmatism births mixed methods.
You got it.
So let's start with the quantitative approach, the world of numbers, variables, and deductive reasoning.
Okay, so the aim of quantitative research is to advance our understanding of fundamental causes and principles by examining relationships among variables.
Variables like age or income.
Exactly. A variable is simply a measurable characteristic that varies: age, income, blood pressure, test scores. But the defining mechanic of quantitative research is a process called operationalization.
Operationalization, which basically means deciding exactly how you're going to measure something before you ever collect a single piece of data, right?
Yes. And this is a crucial step. You have to take a massive abstract concept and brutally narrow it down into a tiny numerical box.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's take the concept of depression.
Okay, huge, complicated concept.
Right. It is a vast, multifaceted human experience. A quantitative researcher cannot measure the feeling of depression.
Because it's not a number.
Exactly. They must operationalize it. So they decide that, for the purpose of their specific study, depression will be strictly defined as a score on the Beck Depression Inventory Scale.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Before they ever meet a single participant, they have declared that reality fits into this specific numerical parameter.
That is, I mean, it forces precision, sure.
It does.
But it deliberately sacrifices all the nuance. Like, you get highly reliable, standardized data that you can run through complex statistical models, but you completely lose the texture of the actual human experience.
Yes. And that is exactly the gap qualitative research is designed to fill.
Because qualitative research relies on non-numerical data, words, descriptions, images, historical documents.
Right. Because it stems from interpretivism, it does not start by building a rigid box to force reality into.
It relies on inductive reasoning.
Exactly. The goal is to develop a deep view of the participants being investigated, allowing the theory to emerge organically from what the subjects actually tell you.
So you are basically walking into the field with a blank canvas.
That's a great way to look at it.
You aren't testing a pre-existing hypothesis about depression. You are just asking people to describe what depression feels like in their own words, in their own cultural context.
Exactly. You focus on language, meaning-making, and descriptive realities. Yeah. But, often complex problems require both.
Right.
You want the precision of the numerical box to understand the scale of an issue and the blank canvas to understand the human impact.
Which brings us to mixed methods research, or MMR, born out of pragmatism.
Yep, the best of both worlds.
We've talked about this before on the show using the hurricane analogy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, like if quantitative research is tracking the exact temperature, barometric pressure, and wind speed of a storm, and qualitative research is sitting down with the survivors to understand the terror of the roof tearing off.
Then mixed methods is the complete documentary.
Exactly. You get the hard data and the human narrative. But mechanically, how do researchers actually weave those together without it just being a mess?
The core mechanism is methodological triangulation.
Triangulation.
Right. You attack the truth from multiple angles to see where the findings actually intersect.
Okay, so give me a real-world example of triangulation.
Imagine studying why disruptive behavior is increasing in a specific school district. A purely quantitative approach might just analyze disciplinary records and, send a multiple-choice survey to teachers.
Right, just numbers.
And a purely qualitative approach might just sit in on a few classrooms and interview the students.
But with triangulation, you do all of it.
All of it. You analyze the disciplinary documents to see the quantitative trend. You survey the teachers to get a broad baseline of their perceptions. Then you conduct deep qualitative observations in the classroom, followed by empathetic, unstructured interviews with the students who are acting out.
Wow. So you're getting it from every possible angle.
Exactly. And if the survey says disruptions are up 40%, and the documents confirm the timeline of the spike, and then the qualitative interviews reveal the students are acting out because a recent budget cut eliminated their arts and recess programs.
Oh, man.
Right? You now have a profoundly robust, multidimensional understanding of reality that no single method could have achieved on its own.
That is so powerful. And what's brilliant about mixed methods is that it doesn't even have to be rigid. The sources outline a difference between fixed and dynamic MMR.
Yes.
So fixed means you plan the whole thing in advance, right?
Right.
But dynamic MMR allows the research to actually evolve on the fly, which is wild for academic research.
It's very cool. If you send out that school survey we just talked about, and the quantitative numbers come back making absolutely no mathematical sense,
Yeah.
you aren't trapped.
Right.
You can suddenly halt the surveys, pivot, and add a qualitative focus group to ask the teachers, hey, what is going on with these numbers?
It is totally responsive to reality.
It is. But, regardless of the lane you choose, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed tip, you eventually have to go out into the real world and extract the data.
The philosophy has to become practice at some point.
Exactly.
So let's unpack that toolkit. How is data physically pulled from the environment?
Well, in the quantitative world, the methods are highly structured to maintain that positivist neutrality we talked about.
Right.
We are looking at surveys, standardized tests, structured questionnaires with closed-ended questions, like yes or no, or a 1 to 5 scale, and tightly controlled laboratory experiments.
But the mechanism of data collection is just as important as the tool itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. If a quantitative researcher is using a survey, they are intensely focused on sampling techniques, specifically random or probability sampling.
Because they want to generalize the findings.
Yes. Generalization is the whole point.
Like, if they want to claim a new teaching method improves test scores for high schoolers, they cannot just test the 5 students sitting in the front row.
No, because that's not representative.
Yeah.
They need a mathematical guarantee that their sample accurately represents the broader population.
Okay, so how do they get that guarantee?
Well, in simple random sampling, every single member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. It's like pulling names out of a giant hat. Or they might use stratified random sampling, where they ensure the demographic breakdown of their sample perfectly mirrors the demographic breakdown of the entire school district.
Oh, I see. So if the district is 60% female, the sample has to be exactly 60% female.
Exactly. This is what allows them to confidently say, because this worked on our sample of 1,000 students, statistical probability dictates it will work on the millions of students nationwide.
Right. So the numbers game absolutely requires rigid sampling.
It does.
But when we shift to the qualitative toolkit, the mechanics just completely change. The tools are totally interactive.
They have to be.
Right. Face-to-face interviews, participatory observations, focus groups, and the sources even mention picture elicitation, where researchers use imagery to prompt memories.
Yeah, that's a really cool technique.
But the goal is to establish deep interpersonal trust, right? To allow for genuine disclosure.
Yes.
And this brings up a small but I think, really vital detail from the notes, the use of a dictaphone or an audio recording device.
It seems like a minor administrative detail, I know, but it is deeply tied to the philosophy of Verstein.
That empathetic understanding.
Right. If you are conducting a deeply emotional interview, trying to understand someone's subjective reality, you cannot be staring down at a legal pad, furiously scribbling notes, and asking them to repeat themselves.
Hold on, I didn't catch that trauma. Say it again.
Exactly. It totally destroys the interpersonal connection.
Yeah.
An audio recording ensures total accuracy of the data, capturing the exact phrasing, the pauses, the size, while freeing the researcher to maintain eye contact, read body language, and fully engage as a human being.
It facilitates the empathy required for the method.
Perfectly said.
But, okay, here is where I really need to push back on qualitative research.
Okay, let's hear it.
Qualitative research relies on purposive sampling, meaning they purposely select their participants instead of choosing them randomly.
Yes, they do.
But if you are specifically picking the people you want to talk to, aren't you just building an echo chamber?
I hear this critique all the time.
Because how does that qualify as rigorous research if you are essentially rigging the game to find the answers you want?
See, you are applying a quantitative metric of success to a qualitative methodology.
Am I?
Yes. A quantitative researcher views purposive sampling as rigging the game because their goal is mathematical generalization.
Right, they want to speak for the whole population.
But qualitative research does not care about generalization. They are not trying to create a universal rule.
They care about extreme depth in a highly specific context.
Exactly. Consider a researcher studying the lived experience of female CEOs navigating hostile corporate takeovers.
Okay, very specific.
Right. Random sampling is totally useless there.
Yeah.
If you randomly select business professionals, you might get one person who fits the criteria out of 10,000.
Right, you just be wasting time.
So you must purposely select information-rich cases. You deliberately seek out the exact individuals who have experienced the phenomenon you are studying. You aren't building an echo chamber. You are seeking deep saturation of a very specific narrative.
Deep saturation. So you just keep interviewing them until what?
Until no new information emerges.
Oh, okay, that clarifies the rigor. It's just a completely different definition of validity.
Exactly.
Okay, so the researcher has done the work in the field. They have their perfectly randomized surveys, or they have their hours of purposively sampled audio recordings.
Right.
They return to the lab and they just dump it all on the desk. This raw data is utterly meaningless until it is analyzed. So how do we turn this noise into actual knowledge?
Let's start with analyzing the numbers.
Okay.
Quantitative analysis is driven by statistical procedures examining relationships among variables. The foundation is univariate analysis, which examines a single variable in total isolation.
Okay, so the researcher just wants to know the shape of the data.
Right.
Like if they surveyed 1,000 people on their age, they just want to see the distribution.
Exactly. They use histograms or frequency plots to visualize how many people fall into each age bracket. It doesn't tell you why, it just tells you what is there.
Okay, so how do they find out the why?
To start answering the why, they move to bivariate analysis.
Bivariate, so two variables.
Yep. Examining the relationship between two variables. This is where they look for correlation. Does an increase in one variable correspond with a change in another?
Right.
They visualize this with scatter plots. Like, does a higher level of daily exercise correlate with a lower resting heart rate?
And when they are running these analyses, they rely on core metrics of central tendency, right?
Yes.
Assuming they have continuous ratio data, meaning numbers with a true zero, like income or age, they are looking for the mean, the median, and the mode.
Right, the classics from high school math.
Right. The average, the exact middle value of the data set, and the most frequently occurring value.
And these metrics allow the researcher to summarize massive amounts of data into just a few descriptive numbers. But they must be super careful.
Why?
Well, say they are studying income in a neighborhood, and one billionaire lives on the street.
Oh, yeah.
The mean or average income will be wildly skewed upward, presenting a totally false reality of how wealthy that street is.
Because of one outlier.
Exactly. In that case, the median provides a much more accurate picture of the typical resident. The math has to be applied logically to the context.
Okay, so that is the clean, structured world of statistics. But what happens when you turn to the other pile on the desk?
Oh, the messy pile.
Right. 50 hours of deeply emotional interview transcripts, field notes, and photographs. How do you analyze words without letting your own biases totally infect the process?
It is tough.
Yeah.
Qualitative data analysis, or QDA, is a massive undertaking. The data is fundamentally unstructured. To find meaning, researchers typically rely on three major analytical frameworks.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is content analysis.
Which sounds like simply reading the content, but from the sources, the mechanism is much more systematic than that.
Oh, way more. You evaluate patterns across a specific timeline, and you must have a strict research question before you begin.
Okay.
You develop a coding frame. So if you were analyzing a decade of political speeches to see how the concept of freedom has evolved,
Yeah.
you don't just read them and summarize your feelings.
Right, you're not writing a book report.
No. You systematically code the text. You tag every single instance of the word freedom, analyzing the adjectives placed next to it, counting the frequency of specific metaphors used in conjunction with it.
Wow.
You are basically structuring the unstructured text to reveal hidden patterns.
Okay, what's the second framework?
The second framework is narrative analysis. This focuses heavily on the structure of stories. It is not just what the person said, but how they constructed their reality through the telling of the event.
Give me an example.
Consider a sociologist interviewing an entrepreneur about a massive business failure. Narrative analysis requires dissecting how the entrepreneur casts themselves in the story.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Do they use language that makes them a victim of circumstance? Do they cast themselves as a tragic hero? The pauses, the deflections, the moments they speed up their speech. All of these linguistic markers are data points that reveal their underlying worldview and their coping mechanisms.
That is fascinating. It's almost psychological.
Very much so.
And finally, we have thematic analysis, which seems to be the most common way to handle vast amounts of interview data where you are trying to find a shared experience among multiple people.
Yeah, this is the heavy lifter. The mechanism here requires reading through all the transcripts and engaging in an iterative coding process.
Iterative, meaning doing it over and over again.
Over and over. You break the text down into small, distinct concepts. Then you group those concepts into larger categories. Finally, you synthesize those categories into overarching themes.
You are finding the hidden architectural beams supporting the messy reality of the interviews.
That is a beautiful way to phrase it, yes.
But man, it is an incredible amount of intellectual labor.
Exhausting.
And this brings up a fascinating friction point for researchers who utilize mixed methods, because they do the grueling statistical work for the quantitative data and the exhaustive thematic analysis for the qualitative data. They synthesize them perfectly. But when they try to share this monumental achievement with the academic world, they hit a brick wall.
They absolutely do. The publication hurdle is a severe bottleneck for pragmatic researchers.
Why?
Academic journals have strict, non-negotiable word limits. If you write a purely quantitative paper, you have plenty of room to explain your statistical models and show your charts.
Sure.
And if you write a purely qualitative paper, you have space to include the lengthy, rich quotes necessary to prove your themes.
Because you need the quotes to prove the data.
Exactly. But if you do both, you run out of real estate.
Yeah.
You literally cannot fit a robust statistical breakdown and a nuanced narrative analysis into an 8,000-word limit.
That is so frustrating.
It is. As a result, the integration often fails. Researchers are forced to chop their findings down. They present a truncated section of numbers followed by a brief section of quotes without ever having the space to fully integrate the two.
So the whole point of mixed methods, blending the scale of the storm with the terror of the survivors, it just gets lost.
It gets completely lost because the format of academic publishing hasn't fully adapted to methodological pluralism.
It is like buying all the ingredients for a complex, beautiful cake, but being forced to serve the flour, the eggs, and the sugar in completely separate bowls because you don't have an oven big enough to bake them together.
That is exactly what it feels like.
Which brings us all the way back to you, the listener. We have journeyed from the philosophical debates of reality all the way to the brutal realities of journal word counts. So why does this backstage pass matter to your daily life?
It matters because you are a consumer of this knowledge every single day.
Yeah.
The news media constantly packages academic research into easily digestible headlines designed to trigger your common sense or your biases.
Right. The next time you see a headline claiming, "New study shows remote work destroys company culture," you are no longer a passive recipient of that information. You know how to look under the hood.
Exactly.
You will instantly ask, wait, how did they operationalize company culture? Was this a positivist study that just surveyed 5,000 managers using a rigid 1 to 5 scale, generalizing a numerical trend? Or was this an interpretivist study that spent 6 months embedded with 3 specific teams conducting thematic analysis on their communication patterns?
Recognizing the methodology allows you to recognize the limitations of the claim. A quantitative survey cannot explain the emotional nuance of why culture is degrading.
Right.
And a qualitative deep dive into 3 teams cannot prove a universal law for all remote workers.
Yeah.
Understanding how the knowledge was constructed makes you highly resistant to being misled by sensationalized data.
You finally know how the sausage is made.
You do.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked about pragmatism and how researchers use whatever works, bouncing dynamically between methods.
Right.
But how will the arrival of advanced AI fundamentally shatter these boundaries?
Oh, man. It is the most pressing methodological question of our time right now. The historical constraint on research has always been human processing power.
Because mixed methods are exhausting because human brains are slow.
Right. But in advanced AI, it can ingest a dataset of 2 million survey responses, calculate the univariate and bivariate statistics, and generate the scatter plots in a matter of seconds.
And simultaneously, that exact same AI can read 2 million open-ended, deeply personal journal entries.
Yes.
It can instantly perform a thematic analysis, coding every single linguistic marker, every pause, every narrative structure, synthesizing the emotional reality of 2 million people without any fatigue.
It's mind-blowing. If a technology can seamlessly blend the massive, objective scale of positivist data with the deep, subjective narrative context of interpretivist data instantly and flawlessly, do those philosophical boundaries even exist anymore?
That's the question.
If we can achieve perfect mathematical generalizability and perfect empathetic context simultaneously, the traditional wars over methodology might become entirely obsolete.
It is a staggering thought. Like, will the future of truth-finding require humans at all? Or will we always need a human researcher to provide the ultimate verstand, that empathy that an AI can simulate but never actually feel?
That is the big question.
Definitely something for you to ponder the next time you hear someone say they did their research.
Mm.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into how reality is measured and meaning is made. Keep questioning the methodologies behind the headlines, and remember, the tool you use determines the truth you find. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.